Marathon. You hear that name and you immediately think of the race, right? That absolutely grueling 26.2-mile test of what a human being can endure. But the story that inspired it? Well, that's one of history's greatest underdog tales, and today we are going to peel back the layers of legend to get to the incredible, real story.
Yeah, we all have this picture in our minds of a single runner, gasping out the news of a victory. But what actually went down on that plain back in 490 BCE, it was so much more complex, so much more strategic, and honestly, it's way more dramatic than the myth.
All right, so before we dive into the nitty-gritty of the battle itself, let's just quickly touch on the story that pretty much everyone knows, the one that's been told for centuries.
It's such a powerful image, isn't it? This one guy running himself into the ground just to utter a single word, victory, and then dropping dead. It's no wonder that's the legend that inspired the modern Olympic event.
And you know, while that tale is completely iconic, the truth, wow. The truth involves a global superpower absolutely bent on revenge, a tiny city-state facing total annihilation, and a battlefield decision so risky it could have either saved democracy or stamped it out before it even had a chance to start. So, to really understand this battle, you have to understand the terrifying force that just landed on the shores of Greece. Who exactly were the Athenians up against?
Look, we are not talking about some local rival here. The Achaemenid Persian Empire under King Darius I was an absolute colossus. It stretched all across Western Asia. For these small, often bickering Greek city-states on the very fringe of his empire, Persia wasn't just another powerful kingdom, it was the superpower of the age. No question.
So, how did they end up in Greece in the first place? Well, it all started with something called the Ionian Revolt. Greek cities that were under Persian rule decided to rebel. And then Athens made a fateful decision to send them ships and soldiers. To King Darius, this was a massive insult, an internal problem being fueled by an outsider. His response was swift and it was brutal. The Persians sailed over, they sacked the city of Eretria, and at that point, everyone knew who was next on the list: Athens.
So now we get to the Athenians. The Persian army is on their shores, camped out on the plain of Marathon, just a stone's throw from their city. They had to make an impossible choice. Do they hide behind their walls and hope for the best, or do they march out and face this massive empire in an open field?
And the numbers here really tell the story. The Greeks were definitely outnumbered. They had about 11,000 soldiers, and that was only thanks to about 1,000 crucial allies from the city of Plataea. They were facing a Persian force of around 15,000. But you know, the most important difference wasn't just the sheer number of soldiers, it was that the Persians had cavalry.
I mean, think about it. You're commanding a block of foot soldiers on a wide-open plain. What is the one thing you are absolutely terrified of?
Exactly. The cavalry. Those horsemen could have just swept around the Greek flanks, shattered their formations, and turned the whole thing into a chaotic slaughter. And because of that threat, the two armies just sat there for days, staring at each other. The Athenians didn't dare attack.
But a standoff like that can't last forever, right? The Athenians needed an opening. They needed one moment of weakness, just one single chance to turn the tables. What could it possibly be? This was it. This was the game-changing moment. For reasons historians still debate today, the Greek generals, led by a brilliant commander named Miltiades, get word that the Persian cavalry is gone. They're just temporarily away from the main camp. This was the tiny window of opportunity they had been praying for.
And this is where we see the absolute genius of Miltiades' plan. Instead of just a simple head-on charge, he does something totally unexpected. First, he reinforces his flanks, the sides of his army, packing them with his best soldiers. Then he does something that sounds crazy. He deliberately weakens his center. So as you can imagine, when the battle kicks off, the Persians smash right through that weak center, which is exactly what Miltiades wanted. Because then came the final devastating move. Those strong Greek wings swung inward like a door, trapping and crushing the shocked Persian forces from both sides. It was brilliant.
And the result of that daring tactic? It wasn't just a victory. It was a total rout that sent shockwaves all the way across the ancient world.
I mean, just let these numbers sink in. The sources report something like 6,400 Persian casualties, and the Greek losses? A mere 192. Now, even if those ancient numbers aren't perfectly precise, the scale of this victory is just staggering. It was an absolute disaster for the Persians. 192. That was the number of Athenian dead. Each one was a citizen of Athens, and that number, it became a badge of honor. That was the price they paid to save their city. The surviving Persians just scrambled back to their ships and got out of there. The immediate threat was over. Athens, the #1 target of the Persian king's revenge, was safe.
So, okay, an incredible military victory, for sure. But the real legacy of Marathon is so much bigger than just one battle. Why are we still talking about it 2,500 years later?
Well, the biggest impact wasn't actually military. It was psychological. For the first time, the Greeks had stared down the world's greatest superpower and won. All of a sudden, Persia didn't seem so unbeatable. And that belief, that incredible surge of confidence, is what would fuel their resistance for decades to come, especially when the Persians came back 10 years later with an even bigger army.
And this also helps us separate the facts from the powerful stories that grew up around the battle later. That famous run to announce the victory, it's not actually in the earliest histories. The real runner, a guy named Phidippides, actually ran from Athens to Sparta before the battle to ask for help. And it wasn't some united Greece fighting. The Spartans weren't even there. This was almost all Athens and their allies from Plataea standing against an empire.
So when you put it all together, Marathon becomes this cornerstone of Western identity. It was proof that a small army of disciplined citizen soldiers, these heavily armored guys called hoplites, could beat a much larger imperial force through smart tactics and courage. It became this timeless symbol of freedom standing up to tyranny.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? The story of Marathon, both the real version and the legend, gave the Athenians a whole new way of seeing themselves. And it really makes you wonder, how do the stories we choose to tell about our own greatest moments, our own impossible victories, define who we are today?